From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery.
Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to JAMA Otolaryngology Author Interviews. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Bryson from the Cleveland Clinic, and today I'm joined by Dr. Matthew Crowson from the Department of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery at the Mass General Brigham Hospital from Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Dr. Bryson. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, I also wanted to highlight your role as an assistant professor of otolaryngology head and neck surgery and as the director of clinical informatics and artificial intelligence at Mass General Brigham. I think we've spoken on the podcast previously about some projects that you have going on, but today we wanted to highlight a viewpoint that you have written on federal funding within our specialty.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. We are in some very dynamic times, aren't we, as it relates to innovation and funding and research in otolaryngology head and neck surgery.
Yeah, I feel like we've always had to be a bit creative in otolaryngology. I think some of the traditional avenues have changed. It's been a fairly dynamic space. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. With the advent of artificial intelligence, people are using these technologies, as I have, and several other collaborators and colleagues in our specialty, as the new tool to either catalyze new research or actually to be the subject of the research itself. Yeah, we are in some fascinating times. And then also with the top-down emphasis from governments and regulatory bodies on using AI and other technologies thoughtfully and funding these are really converging on an interesting nexus of research innovation and industry partnerships and how the government plays into that as well.
Yeah, as you look back maybe over the last year to maybe 1 to 5 years, what have you observed in federal funding and what have you observed with industry partnership, particularly in a space where some of the technology is so dynamic and changing? Sometimes one worries that regular funding sources don't always allow you the expediency that you would need to keep pushing innovation.
Yeah, and that's really the subject of my viewpoint. I wrote it late one night, frustrated with my own personal lack of progress with submitting things through extramural sources and thinking about it and looking at some of the past innovations in our field across all of the specialties. It's that not every innovation needs a federal grant. And part of what I outline in the piece is that, when you need multi-center coordination, standardized long horizon outcomes, population level infrastructure, I think we've seen over time in our specialty, that's where government uniquely really changes the scope through the funding of the NIH and the various institutes.
It sounds like, though, if you're doing something that is not quite at a multi-center level or a population level, maybe a proof of concept type of project, you could be a little more nimble with other sources of funding.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, to be frank, industry and surgeons like us are really the engines of invention and innovation. And I think federal investment is the engine of accountability, as I was saying, making sure the innovations work across populations and over time and for the right patients. But as a mere moral otologist, Paul, I'll give you the example of Dr. House, who came up with the otologic drill, which is a dental drill in the garage, so to speak, as a new way to innovate in otologic surgery. And certainly that wasn't NIH funded, right? And so I think when you look at the core nucleus of innovation for us, really, to your point, is that proof of concept, that feasibility, that aha moment you had that one time, and then you do it on a shoestring to see if it has legs, And so I think we're kind of in this period of time where we're realizing that it's not just the NIH funding as the be-all, end-all for all of the ideas. It's more of how we think about getting the idea off the ground and that proof of concept, and then using other funding or other scrappier methods, you might say, and getting that supported. And then thinking about how that maps to these days what the NIH is thinking about as far as their support.
As you think about some of your projects, sometimes it's putting it together with no budget or local resources. Can you share with the listener, maybe there's many pathways to get somewhere, but say you have a listener who says, well, we have to get federal funding. What does that pathway kind of look like? What's the contemporary pathway now? maybe for a young investigator, a young innovator? I mean, I'm sure it can look a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think generally setting the table as to where we're at now, if you look at the numbers, the NIH is awarding roughly a third as many new grants as it normally would at this point in the fiscal cycle. And so when that money is tight, and I think part of our teaching as medical students, as residents, as, fellows is, just submit the R award and that's kind of, the happy path forward to funding. But I think what we've seen, and perhaps Paul, you've seen this in your specialty as well, but for otology and neurotology, we have societies that give you that kind of seed funding amount. And in our case, if we wanted to pay for some compute to do a machine learning artificial intelligence project, you don't necessarily need a multi-year R award to make a lot of progress. You just need a little bit of seed funding. And there are societies, institutes that are not the NIH that can furnish that. And interestingly, too, industry is very interested in cultivating the use of their technologies. And by doing so, they'll give you things like compute credits. If you're, I'm not going to name one specific vendor, but if you used a cloud vendor for your AI work as an example, they'll often throw you, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 in credits for compute that you would need to do your analyses, do your model training to get you off that ground, just to get that preliminary data going.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, what about, again, I don't have to name specific vendors, but there's almost like a democratization of coding. It's kind of like if you can come up with your prompt and your idea, there may even be, I don't know, desktop coding that's basic that you can do to get your proof of concept going. Is that similar to what you're talking about with, that credit pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. For $9.99 a month right now, you can get a fantastic amount of compute at your fingertips, and you don't have to know a lick of Python or name your other favorite programming language to get a lot of work done. And so I think we are at a fascinating point, Paul, where with some creativity and a cool idea, you can make a very impressive, high fidelity, clickable prototype. You can also leverage the best data science techniques in a low code, no code environment versus having a collaborator or finding a collaborator that you would traditionally do that with. You could have access to tools that can make it pretty dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But ultimately, to your point too, absolutely, access to compute, access to knowledge, access to these tools. The bar is so low now. And again, for $9.99 a month, you could surf up there with some of the big companies putting a lot of spend in their R&D and make a lot of progress.
When you look at projects like this, how do you kind of handle de-identification? Some of these things, right, for $9.99 a month, you don't have to share with the main model, right? Like they give you the option to try to have that privacy to protect an idea maybe, or to have maybe more of a closed space for you to do proof of concept. Does that seem legit to you? What have you seen in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking to do something quick and cheap, these entry level kind of like user accounts you can set up with any of the big foundation labs and their platforms is very easy to do. All you got to do is slap down your credit card, but you have to be super careful about reading the terms of service on these platforms to see where your data is going. And so as it stands, when you're signing on for one of these major companies, the reputable companies, oftentimes they do promise that your data is confidential and private, but they typically have a lot of asterisks on that or opt-out opportunities where you'd have to go opt out of using, your conversations or your code that you're generating with the platform for their internal use for the training and models. And so you have to be a little careful what you're signing up for, although it is very easy to do so. But I also would encourage you all to look at your own institution's licenses and subscriptions, because oftentimes the licenses that your hospital, health system, or university will have, they have a special agreement or enterprise license with one of these major vendor companies such that data is private. And so you could put your preliminary data in there. You could put some information there that you wouldn't potentially want out in the public web or public sphere. You're protected under your enterprise site license via your hospital health system. And so always good to check with your local friendly IT support or your research information services support team, just kind of see what's inbounds and in scope for what you want to accomplish. But by and large, Paul, even with the administrative work that you have to do there to jump through those hoops, so easy to get started, so easy to get going on a shoestring, as we're talking about.
In your other leadership role, are you seeing more clinicians start to look into these pathways? I would imagine you have a good amount of visibility across your system.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many vendors now that are offering to do AI X, Y, and Z for your ABC problem, and there's no limit really of what's out there for solutions. So the point you raised about kind of privacy and making sure that you're being thoughtful where your data is going is certainly one of them. But also what's mission specific, right? And you have access to, as I was mentioning, tools that will expedite data science and kind of do all the AI modeling for you if you're training a computer vision model to do some anatomy segmentation or whatever the case may be. There's no list of vendors out there that can offer solutions, to your problem. But we do have to be careful beyond just the data privacy ends of things too. If you are hooking these into your systems and your research systems, they would go into your, under the hood or potentially into the firewall of your health system or organization. So definitely reach out before you start signing up for things with your institutional credentials and things like that, just because of those issues. But beyond that, though, putting my compliance hat aside for a second, I'm a massive AI evangelist, and all these tools are going to make it so easy to spin up your idea, your problem, model your data, clean your data for that matter on a shoestring to really catalyze your research processes.
We need to engage with it, right? I feel like, for the listener, I think we need to be part of it. How we try to make our processes better, how we make our systems better. I think we should try to be proactive rather than reactive with this.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't around back then, Paul, but when they switched from bean counting to Microsoft Excel, I wonder if there was a revolt back then as well as to this new tool provides an unfair advantage. With all the very well documented perils and issues with artificial intelligence and even potentially the tasks it will take over from us and maybe displace some of our workforce, I totally agree. I think this is only going to help us and be a net benefit, net positive. And I think the government is recognizing this as well as relates to funding. It's much easier to write a grant, as an example, now using these technologies because it helps you get past that blank page problem. There is some federal guidance that has come down that they are discouraging the use of these tools as part of your funding processes or your application generation, things like that too. So we'll have to pay attention to all of those as the regulations come down from on high. But that being said, I think we are inarguably in this new era now where we can really outsource a lot of these processes to do things faster, quicker, cheaper, and more performant eventually as well once we are a little more steady on the reins with them.
Well, it's been great to have you on the podcast again, Matt. Just wanted to highlight this viewpoint for our listeners. We'll have to keep an eye on this space. Maybe we'll have you back as conditions change or as projects come out.
Well, it was such a pleasure to be invited back to talk about this, Paul, and look forward to our next conversation.
I'm Dr. Paul Bryson, and I've been speaking with Dr. Matthew Crowson about federal funding in otolaryngology head and neck surgery. You can find a link to the article in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.